Welcome
For it.
to the Cascade Austin Healey Club Tech Session for spring. I want to thank especially Norm Dupuy and Frank Hosick for all of their hard efforts in getting this thing to come to fruition. And we're here today to give you a good time and some information. So I'm Steve Day, General Manager of British Car Ranch. And together with my son, Christopher, who now owns the company for the past year and has done a marvelous job, we are going to present a tech session for you. Christopher is manning the camera for this operation. Chasen, who is our indispensable IT guy, is completely off screen and working on the computer so that everything runs smoothly for us. Sully and Mike happen to have the hardest job. They're supposed to corral me and make sure that I'm on time, on target, and don't wander off into the weeds. So if you see a Nerf ball come flying across and hit me, you'll know that it's time for me to get back on track again. So today, the timely topic is British car wake up after a winter's nap. How can we go out and start the car and take off and have some certainty that we've got some good driving ahead of us? That's what we're going to cover today. So in doing that, I'm going to follow a checklist, which I've got here. And it's a checklist we have developed here at the ranch over the years for the process of starting up a car that's maybe sat for 6 months. Maybe it's sat for a year, maybe it's sat for 15 years, but it's the same process we go through to start them up safely and do no damage and get some certainty on being able to drive down the road. So every car that comes in gets a portion of this checklist applied to it so that we know what we've got to work with. I would like to ask for a favor of you. It's obvious that you like tech sessions because you're here sitting and listening to this one. So we want to know, what's the topic that you would like to see covered in one of our future tech sessions? Just as a note, we don't lend, borrow, send, sell any information that you give us. It's only used for communication between you and me. So that kind of leads into the legal part of this tech session. The legal department says, okay, you got to say this. And that is, since I'm not going to be there looking over your shoulder or guiding your hands or instructing you on what all the safety process would be, I have to consider, and you have to consider, this tech session not to teach you how to do it, but more to make you more savvy. And with the copy of the tech session, you can go to your professional and say, this is exactly what I want to have done, and this is what you're going to do for me. And you get better results that way. The tech session is broken down, this list is broken down into 3 different sections. And those 3 sections are set up by time, the amount of time it will take to do it, the amount of dollars it would cost to do it, and the certainty that it gives you when you've done that particular level. You get to choose which one you want to apply to your car this year. And you could do the extensive one, you could do the small one, you could mix it up and say, next year I'll do the strong one. It's up to you. Anything you do is going to be better than nothing. So one of the things I always mention in my tech sessions is there's so many different ways to do all these things. There's so many different opinions. Just go on the internet and ask a question. You'll get bombarded with different answers. True with what the content is today. There's more than one way to do this. This happens to be our way that gives us the best results for you on your car. So that's what we're going to talk about. Now, if any part of that disagrees with something you've been told from your mechanic, by all means, listen to your mechanic, because he's the one that's backing you up and giving you the warranty on the work he's doing. So he has to do it his way. So in that case, I guess you would consider this pure entertainment then. So we'll go forward with that idea. Okay, tech session. We're going to talk about what to do with the car. What we found is that most roadside interruptions, breakdowns, are preceded by warnings from that system. So if we use a thoughtful approach and pay attention to the clues, we can short circuit that and eliminate some of those roadside vacations that we take once in a while. And yes, I've taken some myself too. They happen regardless of how hard you work at it, but at least let's give it a push in our direction. So level 1 checklist. This one takes the least amount of time, almost no money, and gives you the weakest results on preventing any breakdowns. But it's a start. So we're going to check the oil level. Well, okay, yeah, that's easy. We're going to look at it and see if it's clean or dark. Is it need a change or is it ready to go? We're going to check the coolant in the radiator. Cold only. Don't ever open up a radiator system that's hot. Pressure and steam and you can get burned. So when it's cold, crack the cap, look down inside. If you've got one of those recovery bottles, it can be filled to the top. If you don't, if it just pees on the ground, then you want to have about 3/4 of an inch of airspace below the cap so that coolant can expand and have a place to stay inside the system. We're going to check the reservoir level. Take the cap off, look inside, see if you've got full, empty, half, what's going on. It gives you a clue as to what's going on in all of the cylinders and so forth. Are they leaking or are they solid? We're going to check the carburetor dash pots. We want to make sure there's at least some oil in there so that the accelerator pump function of that carburetor can be working. Now, it mainly dampens the fluttering effect that the piston has at idle. So if your idle is really squirrely, that's the first thing to check. Make sure you've got oil inside those dampers. And you can use, before you ask me, you can use anything you want. You can use Wesson oil, Singer sewing machine oil, 90-weight gear oil. It doesn't make that much difference. The viscosity of that oil will change the response when you mash down on the gas and want to go. It gives you a richer mixture the thicker that oil is. So you can play with it to your heart's content, or you can just put something in there and forget about it. We're going to check the fuel in the tank to see what's happened chemically over that last 6 months. Crack the cap and just kind of whiff over it and see what it smells like. Go gentle, because if it's really bad, it'll give you a headache. See if it's something that came out of the swamp or if it smells like gasoline. That'll be your first clue. So we've gone through that list. What you do is go ahead, start it up, take off for a drive, and cross your fingers, because you have no idea what's going to happen. Level 2. We'll work into a little bit more thorough examination. This one provides much less risk to the mechanical processes of the engine and the car. Takes less chance of a breakdown because we're going in a little bit deeper to see what's going on. So we're going to charge the battery. If you've got a little voltmeter, you can check it and see if it's 12.6 or lower. We want to check the water level if it's one of those kinds of batteries that has caps on it. If it's a maintenance free, okay, you're done. We're going to visually check the fuel filter to see if we can see inside and see any rust particles or dirt that's accumulated at the bottom of that fuel filter. If you have a metal fuel filter, you're going to have to use your X-ray vision. Now, one question that always comes up is, I don't like using plastic fuel filters because they could melt and cause a catastrophic fire. If you use a brand name like Wix, quality plastic fuel filter, it's not even plastic, it's a polymer, you're going to be safe because that will only melt after the entire car has been burned down. So you're not going to have it causing the fire. And you get that benefit of being able to see what's inside and what's going on in your fuel tank and gas lines. We can add a little bit of Sta-Bil, which is a fuel treatment that stabilizes the fuel and makes it last longer. Should have done it before last fall, but okay, better late than never. And it keeps the fuel in burnable condition longer. Next, we're going to get around to the driver's seat. We're going to turn the ignition key on. And if you've got an electric fuel pump, we're going to listen for that tick, tick to fill the system with fuel. If you've got a mechanical pump, we'll do something different. So you've turned it on, you've energized and filled the fuel system. And we're going to go out and look under the hood at all of the fuel connections. We're going to look underneath the car. We're going to see if there's any fuel leaking. Fuel loves to show up as a leak after a long sit. You haven't touched it. The gaskets dried out, they shifted, you get a leak. We want to make sure it's not peeing out on the ground and leaving the trail behind your car. We're going to change the oil and the oil filter. I definitely recommend using a brand name Napa Wix top line quality oil filter because that's what's protecting the whole bag of parts. I don't like spending $3 or $4 on a cheap oil filter to save money. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Oil, we use the Moss Motors available Collector's Choice 2050 oil made specifically for our classic cars, not any other kind of car. I don't believe you can have a universal oil. In other words, go to the parts store and pick off something off the shelf and have it protect our engines as well as the classic formula motor oil. Brad Penn is another name that does the same thing. We're going to check the hydraulic reservoir again, crack that cap and look down. You could combine these if you want to between 1 and 2. Okay. We're going to look down inside and see if we can see the bottom of that reservoir. If the fluid is clear enough to see the bottom, you're in good shape. The darker that fluid gets means the closer you are to a hydraulic failure. What you're seeing in that darkness is corrosion and rubber particles from all of the seals. So you want to suck that stuff out once a year, replace out of the reservoir, not out of the whole system, suck it out of the reservoir, recycle it, put in fresh fluid, and that extends your driving time. Next, we're going to go back to the driver's seat. We're going to sit down and stomp on the brake pedal and see if it travels an inch and stops and is nice and firm. That would be ideal. We don't want it to be mushy. We don't want to travel to the floor, obviously. We're going to sit there for 30 to 60 seconds and put pressure on the brake pedal. And you don't have to be gorilla, but you just have like you're at a stop sign on a hill. Just hold the brake pedal. Now, be sensory aware. Is that brake pedal moving to the floor slowly, or is it nice and firm and stay put? We want it to be nice and firm. Movement means you've got a leak somewhere or a bypass in the master cylinder. So after 60 seconds, we're going to get out and we're going to look under the car at the backing plate of each wheel. In other words, the other side of the tire. And we're going to see if there's any wetness there. The second warning after a dark fluid, the second warning is some seepage and some liquid getting out of the cylinders and down onto the car. It's not a full-blown leak yet, but it's almost there. We want to make sure everything's dry. Nothing's leaking. You can travel on with a nice, dry, secure system. We're going to, at this point, bleed each wheel cylinder and each caliper. Some of you have 4, some of you have 2. And we're going to pump it up, open the valve down to the floor 6 times for each corner. That will flush out the corroded brake fluid and water that gathers at the lowest point, which is the wheel cylinders, and set you off for a nice year of driving with no problem. We're going to check the tire air pressures. Don't forget to check the spare, because that needs to be filled up also. We're going to go ahead and start it up. Now it's running. We're going to pay attention as the idle. You have to wait on a British car. I don't care what brand it is. You have to wait until the temperature is 160 degrees in the engine before you make any kind of determination on how it's running, because they won't run well until they reach 160 at least. And if they get to 190, that would be your target for driving. That's where it will run the best. So start it up, listen to it, see what's going on. Then go out and just take another perusal around the car, looking underneath and inside. Is anything leaking now that it's pressurized and running? No? Hop in and drive. Drive it gently with awareness. And the next time it needs something, it'll let you know. Doing that checks that level 2 gives you the best chance of driving safely. If you go to level 3, we call that the deep dive. And that's where you're really serious about finding out the condition of your car and preventing anything as much as you possibly can. It's also the most expensive because it's the deepest, right? So, but it also guarantees less roadside vacations. So do all 11 we just talked about, and then continue on. We're going to check the fan belt, see if it's okay. The engine's not running.
Yeah. Check
the fan belt, see what condition it's in. Is it frayed or is it split? If there's more than 2 or 3 splits per inch, you got to replace it. You want to see what the tension is. If you have a generator car, you want a 1/2 inch of deflection on the longest run, because you want it just tight enough to spin the water pump and the generator, but not so tight that it wears out the bearings and bushings in the generator. If you have an alternator, make it sing. It can be as tight as you want it. It's got ball bearings in both ends of it, and it'll take that stress. Also, if you've got an alternator system, you may have a chirp once in a while when you're starting or accelerating. A little bit tighter. Remove and clean the battery connections. Make sure they're as clean as you can get them. We've got aerosol cleaner is available that you can do. Soaks on there, turns red if it's got battery acid detected. Turns to another color, rinse it off, take the terminals apart, clean them with a wire brush type setup. Wow. Christopher, we need a new one. I'm on the fence about coating the terminals with anything. Go ahead if that's what you want to do. We're going to remove, if it's been several years since you've done it, you should also check the connection at the solenoid and the starter. Those like to build up corrosion and lose voltage and cause poor performance from the starter. If you're The next thing we're going to do is check the date code on the tires. DOT says 10 years is the maximum you should put a tire into service. In our case, question. I'm alerted to a question.
Yay, Steve, it's Ira.
Let's see how that works.
Can you hear me? It's Ira. Can you hear me, Steve?
Everyone but Steve can hear you.
Okay, good to know. So when I was checking my main battery lead from the battery to my starter, and I got under my car, I found that my J-clip had actually worn the insulation away. And I have no idea how I did not burn my car to the ground. That was when I was driving back from Big Bear. So I just wanted to put out there that if people might want to just follow their main battery cable and check its condition.
Thank you, Ira. Great point. Thanks for being here. If you have the availability or have your mechanic make sure that they are looking at the long battery cable on an Austin Healey, front to rear, because the J-clips that secure it to the frame also can rub through and create a catastrophic short. You want to catch that one before it happens. So you're looking for any abrasion on that fat battery cable running down under the car. If you've got a Triumph, you can, it also curls down to the engine and grounds in two places there. You can have a problem with the same thing. Check your battery cables and make sure they're not chafed. Thanks. The date code on the tires, 10 years is the safety factor. They look perfect. And in our case, we will hardly ever wear them out because we don't drive enough miles in 10 years. You can't drive 80,000 miles in 10 years, most of us. So we're going to be replacing tires that look great. Sorry, we do it all the time. What happens is, the problem is the glue that holds the internal rubber together doesn't have anything to do with sunshine or exposure. It's the internal glue. Let's go after 10 years, or can let go after 10 years. We see some tires that come in that are dated a lot older than 10. I'm not going to drive on them, but there they are. They're still somehow functioning. I wouldn't run the risk. 10 years is all you need. Next item will be a complete tune-up check. The basic on this is to check your points condenser, cap, rotor, wires, all the spark plugs, all of those items, and make sure they're within spec, make sure they're functioning properly. And if it's been 3 years, you can replace them. But what we have found is that the points that are available to us nowadays, and have been for years, don't hold their gap like the old ones used to. In other words, once a year, we have to see each car and adjust the points to make sure it stays in a great running condition. What it sounds like when they start to, what happens is they close down because of the wear on the rub block. If you get a rub block that won't wear down, it'll wear down the cam of the distributor. So we're stuck in the middle. Okay. Once a year, we need to re-gap those points and send it on down the line for another year. 14 to 16 thousandths is the gap. We put them at 16 so that they've got just a little bit more time before they start closing up. When they start closing up, it shows up as a miss under acceleration. Just one once in a while. Then it's a miss once in a while, just cruising. Then it's a miss quite often. Then it's a miss all the time. Then it's hard to start. Then it won't start at all. So that's kind of the ladder that it follows. Most popular reason that people are having trouble with their ignition is that point setting. After you've gone 3 to 5 years, you want to do the major tune-up, and that would include adjusting the valves and setting the carburetor mixture and setting the idle and going a little bit deeper into that tune-up, maybe replacing the parts in addition to that. If you've got a car that has sat for 5 years or longer, or 3 years or longer, I would remove the spark plugs and put a small squirt of oil in each cylinder and let it sit while you do the rest of the checklist. Then once you've done the checklist and you're ready to actually turn it over by hand to see if it will turn freely by hand. You want to make sure that you've got rotation before you put the starter to it. We're going to chemically flush the cooling system every 3 years. We're going to check the system in between to see what color and what condition it might be in, not just the level, but the color of it too. And to aid us in knowing what the chemical makeup of that coolant mix is, we've got test strips that you can dip into the radiator fluid, and it's got 3 little bars on it, and it tells you what the percentage and chemical condition is of that radiator. Has it lost the corrosion package that's in antifreeze? Is it now just not letting it freeze, but it's going to let it corrode? We don't want that. So 3 years is my recommendation on flushing and new antifreeze. Nobody asked what kind of antifreeze. Do we all know that it's ethylene glycol green? Plain, ordinary, old-fashioned antifreeze. All of the rainbow colors that we've got available to us at the parts store are not specifically suited for our cars. There is no such thing I have ever found in 53 years that's a lifetime coolant. There's too much chemical action, hot and cold, contaminants that wear down the package of corrosion protection in antifreeze. And I don't know if they still do it, but GM says they've got a lifetime antifreeze. Well, I call baloney. And in the shops, they're finding after 3 years, it's getting to the point where they have to do some major flushing to get it cleaned out and start over again. So 3 years is what we should do on our antifreeze. And question.
Yeah, it's me again. Is there any difference between the pre-mixed with water or 100% antifreeze in the jug and you add water?
Is there any difference between the 50-50 premix you buy on the shelf or the virgin untouched antifreeze? I have had this virgin untouched antifreeze for 15 years and haven't used it. I use the pre-diluted 50-50 because it's so much easier to do. It's already mixed, it's already ready to go. You just put it in, and that's the difference, is the ease of use. The chemical is the same as long as you're accurate about getting 50% water, 50% virgin antifreeze. And thank you, Ira. Okay, gold star. Nice job. We're going to check the transmission, the differential, the overdrive for their oil levels and see what it says. We're going to look at that fluid and see if it's dark and nasty or is it nice and amber like it should be. If it's been forever since you've done it, go ahead and drop it, flush it, fill it again, and start fresh. I would say 5 years would be very conservative to change the differential, transmission, so forth oil. We are seeing more and more overdrives failing because of mud, muck in the overdrive system than ever before. And that is a direct relation to not having ever changed or very infrequently changed the oil in the transmission overdrive. Transmission and overdrive take the same oil. They feed off the same sump. So dropping that out, putting in some fresh, that's a great idea to do. You want to use, I'll give you just a little extra tech session. You want to use GL4 gear oil to be perfectly right about what you're putting in the transmission. I hear firestorm break out from coast to coast because there's every fluid in the world that people believe should be in the transmission and overdrive. I did the research of going back to Norman DeVille, de Laycock, and asking the engineers, what are the requirements for lubrication of the overdrive and the transmission? And he gave me the list of requirements. And the only thing that matches those requirements exactly is gear oil. So you can use whatever you want, but you should change it once in a while. The GL5 is designated gear oil for the differential. And everybody agrees that should be a 75-90 weight gear oil. GL5 is acceptable for the differentials. And that's printed right on the label of the bottle that you buy right here in front. About every 3 years, we're going to flush the complete hydraulic system of its fluid and put in fresh. Then when we're all done flushing, we'll bleed it, make sure the pedal is strong, and away we go. But if we'll do it every 3, okay, maybe 4 years, you'll keep away from a lot of your hydraulic problems. If you've gone to Pertronix, you don't have an interval because nothing is touching. It's a magnetic trigger. So you don't have anything to check. And that's one of the huge benefits they tout for Pertronix electronic ignition. Now, we have seen a lot of Pertronix fail, and we tried to dig into the reasons what's going on. Why should that system fail in our classic cars when it's working for everybody else? Yes, there are people that say, I've got Pertronix for 20 years and it's worked perfectly. Don't mess with it, leave it alone. It can work that long. So what's the difference in there between 20 years and 6 months? What I found finally from the manufacturer is that the Pertronix is very sensitive to voltage fluctuation and extremely susceptible to a bad ground. So if you're going to use Pertronix, you should have a double grounding system inside the distributor, two wires doing the grounding, and you should have an alternator or some kind of a stable electrical system in our classic car. And that's what's really killed the ones that died was a generator system that's putting out 14.5, 12.2, 15.6, some kind of a variable, and it just, the Pertronix doesn't like it. So there you go. Lauren Campbell.
I just wanted to add that I learned the hard way. There are 3 different versions of that Pertronix distributor. 2 of them require a 0.6 ohm coil. And if you put a stock 3 ohm coil on them, you will burn them up.
Yes. Talking about the requirements for the different Pertronix ignitions, they're very, very definite about wanting a certain amount of ohms resistance from the coil. In other words, if you're going Pertronix, you should go Pertronix coil to really match up well. Because you can, if you get the wrong resistance in the coil, the voltage is going to fluctuate and it's going to burn out the transfer discharge. So yes, thank you. Chris McDonald. Oh, hi, Chris.
Good morning. Thank you. Quick question. Do you find that one or the other, when they fail, is more likely to cause damage? I think back to my 70 Cadillac when my points went bad, it backfired and blew out my muffler. Not the end of the world. Just a question I had.
Okay. Do points or Pertronics cause more downstream problems? Valve, exhaust, muffler, carburetor backfire. Which one causes the least amount of problems? And the answer is the system that has been checked over carefully and maintained every year with a yearly adjustment and checkup. That's the one that gives you the least amount. That could be Pertronics or it could be points. Inherently, you'd have to give Pertronics an edge because properly set up and running, it will go longer than the points will. So that's a political answer to a simple question. Does that answer your question? Oh, good.
Yes, thank you.
We are going to go back to level 3. And at this point, you're going to have your expert raise the car up, pull the wheels off, and check the dust boots on the wheel cylinders and visually check them on the calipers and see if there's any moisture that's showing up there. On your wheel cylinders, you can pull that boot aside, and as soon as you do, it's supposed to keep dust out, not fluid in. So if you pull it back and it's dry, and that's perfect. If there's any moisture behind that boot, you're headed for a breakdown in 3 to 9 months and a brake failure at that point. Next, we're going to move over to the steering box and the idler arm, if you've got an idler arm, and we're going to top up and check those. On the Austin Healey's, they're notorious for leaking all of the fluid out of the steering box because that seal doesn't seal anymore. And it's just a nice process of pouring it on the floor when you pour it inside the steering box. So we have gone to using a constant velocity grease for front wheel drive cars that's available in tubes at the parts store. And it's much more viscous than 90 weight oil, which should be in there, but it's also very movable so that it lubricates all of the moving parts inside the gearbox. And that has stopped those terrible leaks, and you can maintain a drier car because of it. The idler arm, same thing. We can fill it with, you can fill it with 90 weight. It doesn't seem to wear the seal out quite as badly. Or you can use that, it's called NLGI1 grease. Just a simple CV joint grease is all it is. If it's been 3 to 5 years since you've checked your wheel bearings, it's a good chance to do it now. Wheels off, bearings out, cleaned up, inspected, see if there's any damage to them. If there's any markings on the bearing surface, replace them, grease them up, pack them back together, adjust. So this is a big project for the car. But if you ever run out of grease and weld a bearing to the shaft, it's not going to be a very good experience at all. We're going to change the fuel filter instead of about 3 years, instead of just looking at it. Then we're going to get in the car and start it up. We're not quite done yet. We're going to drive it for about a mile, very conservatively, bring it back into the shop and look it over again to see what's come loose in that 1 mile of driving. If it's all tight and sealed up, you're set to go. Drive to New York. So that completes the tech session for today. I would like to add at this moment that British Car Ranch is going to have Run to the Ranch again this year. We are June 1st, Saturday, here at the ranch, and we're going to do something special this year, something we haven't done at a Run to the Ranch. We're going to have my drive-through tech session with Christopher and myself, offering you a free hoist examination as you drive up and come through the shop. After that, we're going to have our meal. After that, we may have a tour. The next morning, we'll have a get together. So June 1st, arrive about 11, and we're going to go from there. Now we can move on to the question and answer period. And I encourage you to think about the question that you've had and haven't been able to get an answer to it, and fire it up to us and see what we can do with it.
I have one for you. See if this shows up here. Yeah, hi, I've got a question for you. Can you hear me? No? This month.
Everyone but Steve can hear you.
Oh, fair enough, Steve. Well, everyone, troubleshoot the overdrive not kicking down with a blip of the throttle. I have fresh oil.
Okay, so we've got an overdrive that we're going down the road. We've got it engaged in overdrive. It's operating fine. We want to come out of overdrive. This must be an Austin Healey. And properly set up, you have to push down on the gas pedal 1/6 of its travel to get it to come out of overdrive. Now, I want that to happen at about 2000 RPM, so you're not overstressing it, but the process is the same. You want to come out of overdrive, you push down on the gas pedal, and it doesn't come out. A couple of reasons for that. The most obvious one would be the adjustment on the throttle kickdown switch on the firewall under the hood. That's got a rod that comes up from the accelerator linkage and hooks into an arm, and it pulls it as the linkage is worked by your foot. That is supposed to be set up so that when it pulls down about this far, it kicks out. Yours is either adjusted too far this way or too far this way. And there's a process to do that. I have a new text bulletin that I haven't published yet. If you would like to have that procedure, shoot me an email.
Okay.
The second reason would be there's dirt in the operating valve under the nut on the side of the overdrive. There's a long, about this long, skinnier than a pencil rod that has a hole running down through it with a tiny little hole at the bottom. When it's time to come out of overdrive, it's supposed to let oil go down into that shaft and pee out that little hole, bleed off the pressure, and come out of overdrive. If the tiniest piece of schmutz gets in that hole, it won't drain down and come out of overdrive.
Okay.
So that would be the first two things I would look at to solve that problem.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I'll send
Good.
you an email.
Aha! I'm glad. There's always one question about silicone brake fluid. And the question is, what are the advantages? What are the disadvantages of using silicone brake fluid? Basically, silicone brake fluid has the advantage of a higher boiling point. So if you're racing, towing, steep hills all the time, higher temperatures in the brakes, you've got a higher boiling point. The second thing is it's less corrosive to your paint. The third thing is supposed to be that it doesn't absorb water, but that's not true. It doesn't suck water out of the atmosphere, but it allows water to get into the system and float to the bottom. So that's not really an advantage. So we've got temperature and we've got the paint protection. Regular .3 or .4 brake fluid is what we use here at the ranch, is completely satisfactory for all methods of our driving. It costs half as much for .3 or 4 as it does for .5. .5 is what silicone fluid is called. So you've got twice the expense and you've got those two benefits. Okay, now we'll talk about the maintenance requirements. The maintenance requirements for the .3 and 4 is to bleed it every year, flush it every 3 years, and watch it in between to see what the color does for changing. The maintenance for the silicone brake fluid is you want to bleed it every year, you want to flush it every 3 years, and you want to look at it all the time to see if it's changing color. Purple color for .5, amber for this one, just for your information. Wait a minute. The maintenance is exactly the same. And that's the truth. We see silicone fluid failing just as fast as .3 and 4. So it's not a longer lasting product. It still allows water to get in the system and collect at the wheel cylinders. So the next disadvantage is if you want to switch to go and use silicone brake fluid, you have to drain the system and flush it with .5 silicone fluid, not anything else. Anything else will leave residue behind. So you've got to use the expensive fluid to flush until you get all of the .3, 4 out of the system. .3 and 4 and 5 don't mix. They create this coagulation of junk that starts to promote corrosion. So you've got to get that out of there. Or if you're going from silicone back to this one, you got to do the same thing. You got to flush it with your regular brake fluid until it's absolutely clean. So the common sense recommendation is whatever you're using at the moment, stay with it. If you're thinking about changing it, wait until you have to do some hydraulic work, replacing cylinders and so forth, and then make your change. We like the performance and the handling ability of the .34 regular brake fluid, and that's what we use. What we recommend is that one. The .5 silicone is for people that want to have something special. It's not necessarily so, but they want something special, so there you go. I want to know what the difference in performance is between being at sea level and 2,000 feet elevation. Normally, 2,000 feet of elevation is okay. An increase of 2,000 feet in elevation will cause there to be less oxygen available for the car to run on. So the car will run richer, and it may choose to run better, or it may choose to run worse and just give bad gas mileage. It may decide to wash the rings out because it's too rich. I wouldn't think that'd be a problem at 2,000 feet, maybe 5,000. But so you've limited the amount of oxygen that's available at the 2,000 foot increase, and that's what's going to affect your performance. If the car was originally set up on the rich side, it'll be way too rich and it won't idle. If the car was set up on the lean side, it may run better at 2,000 feet. So it depends on what the individual car was set up at by the mechanic at that time. Does that answer?
Yeah, my
Or Mark?
mechanics are all 2,000 feet below me. I don't know, Steve, you can hear me.
That is correct. His car was set up for sea level or 2,000 feet lower, and now he's gained 2,000 feet and he's having performance issues. And that probably tells me we don't know if it's too rich or too lean. That's what we'd have to find out first. And that's what's causing the performance fall off, is not enough fuel or way too much. They'll give you a very similar reaction.
Thanks. I think it's too rich.
Okay. If you're mechanically inclined, you can play with it and see what happens, but you're entering a dangerous area of how do I get back to where I was? Yeah. We're not going to give you that trick. It's very closely guarded secret from the family heirlooms. Oh, okay. What's the formula or the dimensions for a gas stick checker for an Austin Healey? Right? Dennis, if you're out there, look at this baby. We still have it. Dennis Saxon made us this piece of wood here, and it is notched and located for an Austin Healey. And you can see that this cutout right here is where full is, and then it measures down to 0. So here is your dimensions. If you would like, you can email me and I'll give you a picture of it with some notes to help you make your own. But this would be empty, full. And that would be for any of the 104s or 6 cylinders. Does that help? Oh, and if you were interested, here is the mark for TR3 and we think TR6. So this would be empty. This would be full on those cars. There's no such thing as a dumb question. So go ahead.
All right, thank you. So I have a 59 MGA. I'm running an alternator. I've had the car 40 years. It's my daily driver. She's eating high beams. I think just the one high beam, but I didn't keep good enough notes. But what has happened is I'm having to replace a high
gathering
beam on one
information.
side. And where should I start? That's what I want to know.
We're going to check the ground, especially for the side of the car that's always burning out. There's possibly too much resistance in that ground connection. And it's very likely that it's never been touched and cleaned. So do that. And the second thing would be the alternator is too powerful and surging too much voltage into the system, more than it can handle, and burning out that light bulb, headlight. Does that give you something to work with?
Yes, and that was my guess, so I'm very happy about that. I did put a stronger alternator in it recently, but we've been eating headlights for a while, so I will start with the ground. Thank you, sir.
They put a stronger alternator in and it's still eating. No, you need a weaker alternator. Alternators are rated at the number of amps that they put out and voltage. And our typical amperage is 28 amps or less, could be 25 on that MGA. And that's what that system is set up for. If you've got an alternator that's putting 45 or 50 amps out, or 120, like the modern cars, or 200, we're going too far out of field. If you've got too many amps coming into the system, it's not only going to do the headlight, it's going to start doing switches and connections. So it's imperative for you to find out what the output capability of that alternator is and go from there. Either tone it down to 35 or 40, or you just have to tone it down. So does that give you a next move?
No, but it gives me a next question. To tone it down, do you mean just replace it with a different alternator, or is there a way to limit the amperage?
Excellent question. Yes, there's a way to do it, but it's not a commonality. It's an alternator is built to do this many amps, and that's what they are. So you have to replace it with one that's a lower output. Do you know if it's a Lucas alternator or another brand? COIL? Do we have a preferred brand of coil? The manufacture of coils has been all over the board, as I'm sure you've noticed, and the quality is a rainbow. We have gone to, if you'll excuse me for just a moment, I'll go get it and show you. Except we don't have one. Okay, I'm back. We've gone to Napa Eklund, and that has given us more consistent results than anything else. I just sold the last one. I don't know what the part number is. I can get that for you. IC14? IC14 is the part number through Napa. Every store in the United States will be able to sell you one. And it solves our problems. I thank you so much for sitting through the tech session and joining in with us. We're going to be putting on some more of them. Keep your eyes and ears open. We'll send you an invitation. And please go to our website and fill out our tech session survey so that we get some ideas of what you, the people, are wanting to know about. So thank you, Norm and Frank, and we'll see you on the next one.